Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Jitendra Srivastava from Maharani Lakshmibai Government College of Excellence, Gwalior. I am going to discuss about evolution of user studies under paper Library User and User Studies. User is an important component of any system, whether it is library system or information centers. Without any user studies, we cannot move towards any kind of library services or evolution of library services. So it is very important to study about users. Objective of this module is to know categories of library users, to know origin and development of user studies, to know different methods of user studies, to know recent trends in user studies. Now let us see user studies. What is user study? User studies, use studies, information need studies, information transfer studies, communication behavior studies, information dissemination and utilization studies, user research, etc. are all closely related and often not clearly defined, and there is no universal definition. There is a need to understand the information need, information seeking behavior of the user to facilitate library and information centers to provide effective and quality services to its users. It becomes necessary to point out the limitations of use and user studies. Use studies may not reveal the effect of use, indirect use of a library and information centers, and many fruitful interactions of users with library. Further, use of a library and information centers and its utility to users are oftenly quite different. A library or information center may be used, but it may not be used. Another may be useful, but may not be used. A third may be neither useful nor used, and ideal is one which is both used and useful. Earlier user studies were mainly related to scientists involved with biochemistry, medicine, engineering, physics, etc. The high concentration of user studies in these sciences can be partially attributed to the fact that the publication of professional and scientific information in these disciplines was much more developed at the time in comparison with the humanities, technology, health, industry, and agriculture. Library user is an important component of any library because without any user, any library cannot run. There is a need to study about users to improve library and information services of the library. Dr. Ranganathan says that library user as a freshman or a layman or a fresh user. When we talk about user studies, in earlier studies, mainly it was focused on scientific and information journals. Those time the field was engineering, science, biomedical, and science and technology. User is an important component in a growing information society because in a growing information societies, information is become vital resources of the society. It may be point out that information is a vital resources of any country because in every walks of life we need information. To develop library and information centers and to improve library services, there is a need to user study, because user are most important component of the library, and without user study we cannot improve library components. Now let us see user studies in 1930s. In the literature of library and information science, the earliest reference we come across is to the study conducted by L.R. Wilson in the late 1930s. It was an attempt to investigate the distribution and status of libraries in the USA, and was not aimed at obtaining information relating to library use or users. Now come to the user studies in 1940s. The foundation for the user studies was laid down in 1948 in the Scientific Information Conference of the Royal Society, where Urquhart and Bernal brought out their research findings. Urquhart, 1948, conducted his study on the distribution and use of scientific and technical information. He was associated with the sources of reference to the literature borrowed. The purpose of consulting the borrowed item and the usefulness of the item in relation to factors like year of publication and its form. Let us talk about user studies in the 1950s. The concept of users and their information needs found some expression at the first conference of Royal Society held at London, and became a subject of discussion at the International Conference on Scientific Information held at Washington in 1958. Professor J.D. Bernal's paper entitled "The Transmission of Scientific Information: A User's Analysis" received a great attention. It may be mentioned here that a pilot study on the use of scientific literature by scientists was conducted by R.R. Shaw in 1956 on behalf of National Science Foundation. Shaw's studies is considered as one of the pioneering effect in the direction of user studies. When we talk about user studies and their information needs, it becomes necessary to conduct a user study, because information needs of any kind of user helps in library and information center to improve their library services and information services in any kind of library and information centers. Now let us see user studies in the 1960s. Literature review shows that the number of user studies increased rapidly. In 1963, the American Psychological Association conducted a series of studies concerning psychologists, which was one of the first and most important projects carried out in social and behavioral sciences. Mengel refers first in the Annual Review of Information Science and Technology in the year 1966. Two comprehensive bibliographies of user studies in 1964 and 1966, each containing 438 and 676 studies respectively. Number of comprehensive studies have emerged on the subject. Use of scientific literature, example Davis and Bell compiled a bibliography consisting of 438 such studies as early as in 1964. When we talk about library users, then we came to know that user is an important component of any information and library systems. User studies, there are different types of user studies has been done in various decades. When we talk about user studies in the 1970s, user studies flourished and introduced a diversity of target user groups like magistrates, urban citizens, personnel working in local authorities, university students, etc. It has been recorded by the 1977 more than 1000 important studies were conducted on the subject of user studies. It must be mentioned that the growth of science and technology and the importance accorded to the use of scientific information proliferated such attempts of user studies. Ranganathan termed as library user is a freshman or a layman. There is a need to guide them to use library and information centers. Now let us see user studies in the 1970s. An event of great significance in the history of user studies was the establishment of the Center for Research on User Studies in 1975 by the British Library at University of Sheffield. The main objective of this center was to create a national center to act as a focus for research in user studies. In the year 1976, Martin, in his article User Studies and Library Planning, discussed the user studies and appraised their role in library planning. Author provided various guidelines for conducting user studies and concluded that user data strengthens the planning and decision-making processes at several levels. So the responses of users should be an integral part of the ongoing practice of librarians providing constant feedback. Now let us see user studies in the 1980s. The 1980s were a decade that was characterized by an increasing awareness surrounding the conceptual framework and methodological issues of user studies. One of the first attempts at articulating this awareness was the publication in the journal Social Science Information Studies of the papers presented in a symposium of qualitative approaches to the study of information problems. In the year 1988, Kulthau conducted a study examining the application of library skill in assigned library research by high school seniors. Now let us come to the user studies in the 1980s. In the year 1980, Belkin formulated the theory of the anomalous state of knowledge for information seeking behavior. It includes 6 stages: starting, chaining, browsing, differentiating, monitoring, and extracting. Now we will try to understand what is anomalous state of knowledge of any user. When we talk about information seeking behavior of the user cannot express his information need. At the time of expression, user says that it may be user's information need may be broader or narrower. Because of this anomalous state of knowledge, as Belkin called that, a user cannot find his or her information because their subject may be either it may be broader or narrower. Now let us see User studies in the 1990s. The 1990s also witnessed the tremendous growth and establishment of the Internet as an information provider in the information community. As a result, a number of studies set out to investigate plethora of issues concerning the impact of the Internet on the user and the information community. Tillman in the year 1993 carried out a survey and monitored 4 discussion lists over a period of 6 months in order to determine the use of the Internet as a reference tool by the special librarians. In the year 1996, another small case study was conducted by Eager and Oppenheim to examine the information needs of the academics. The major objectives of this study was to know and test an alternative observation techniques, shadowing. In this technique, participants would be observed whole day. Another study was conducted and published by Abels in the year 1996 and LIB in the year 1997 to explore the factors that influence the use and option of electronic networks by engineering and science faculties at small industries. A recent study was published examining the factors that influence the use and adoption of electronic networks by science and engineering faculty at small institutions. The study identified a number of factors that are likely to influence use and adoption of electronic networks. These included perceived accessibility, proximity, workstation availability and experience, ease of use, academic discipline, task and perceived utility. Now let us see user studies in 2000. Wilmut in the year 2003 in his article titled Why Conduct User Studies? The role of empirical evidence in improving the practice of librarianship emphasized that by gathering evidences about library users, their interactions with library services and materials and context in which those materials and services are used. In the year 2006, Carr studied what users want, an academic hybrid library perspective. The author described the development of user-centered approach in academic libraries over the recent decades. In the year 2008, Varghese, in his study User Studies in the Electronic Environment, Review and Brief Analysis, the article summarized the result of 101 user studies conducted in the electronic environment. Now let us see some important library user studies. Number of library user studies has been made by various organizations in various countries. Some important library user studies and their findings are described. First is Council on Library and Information Resources and the Digital Library Federation, Dimensions and Use of the Scholarly Information Environment. The important findings of these studies are number of interviews 3,200, 55.4% of all respondents browsing library book stacks to get information. 52% graduate students use print resources. 59% graduate students use print indexes and abstract, while 11% use of e-journals. 28% users find reading material on a screen satisfactory, and last finding is 14% wants more print as compared to 11% electronic journals, and 89% wants more books. Now we come to the another study conducted by OCLC. OCLC White Paper on Information Habits of College Students in the year June 2002 with a sample of 1050 qualified respondents. Among its findings are 31% of all respondents use internet search engines to find answer to their questions. 89% use campus libraries print resources including books, journals, articles, and encyclopedias. Now we come to the another study which was made by Electronic Publishing Initiative at Columbia, survey of responses from 1,233 students and scholars. Some important findings of this study are dependent on physical library 75.8%, to retrieve books and articles from library's website 81.5%, physical library use more than once a month 67.7%, search engines were not precise 80.2%, physical library is still an important destination for students. More than half of the respondents somewhat strongly agree that electronic resources can result in overload information. And besides this, almost half of the respondents agree that this overload can be overwhelming for them. Now we come to the India. INSDOC conducted a user survey relating to its current awareness service entitled INSDOC List of Current Scientific Literature as early as in the year 1964. As a result of the findings of this survey, INSDOC had to wind up the above mentioned current awareness service and had to start the compilation of Indian science abstracts. Now we discuss about user studies in India. INSDOC conducted a user survey relating to its current awareness service entitled INSDOC List of Current Scientific Literature as early as in the year 1964. Another significant study is conducted by Carl M. White regarding the use of Delhi University Library in the year 1965. Now we will discuss about user studies in India. When we talk about important and significant study about user in India, was first efforts was made by M.S. Sridhar. His doctoral research work was on information seeking behavior of the Indian space technologist of ISRO Satellite Center, Bangalore. Let us see user studies in India. In the year 1965, the Indian Association of Special Libraries and Information Centers organized a seminar on users and library and information service. User studies shows following facts which may facilitate to improve library and information services to its users. Information awareness of the user. There is a need to aware users with respect to use of library materials, with respect to use of information resources, with respect to the use of web-based resources, and overall we can say that library users should be aware to use information. Interaction of user to library and information resources. There is a need to motivate users in the library to interact library and information resources. As far as possible, libraries should provide gateway to the information which is especially accessible to its users. Next is information literacy skills of the information users. Information literacy skill is the most important for the library users. Basically, information literacy is to locate information, to search information, to retrieve information, and to use information through search engine or any kind of internet resources or information resources. Information use patterns of the library and information centers. User study shows that how information is used by library users to library and information centers. There is a need to study information use pattern of the library and information centers. With the help of information use patterns, any library can improve their library services, their collection, and reformulate their acquisition policy. Next is information seeking behavior of the users. Information seeking behavior of the user is another important seeking behavior of the users. There is also need to study information seeking behavior of the users. With the help of information seeking behavior of the user, we can design information systems, information centers on the basis of findings of information seeking behavior of the users. Another one is information need of the users. It is important to know information need of the users in the libraries as well as information centers. With the help of information need of the users, library knows information need of the users and they can able to fill their information need. Information priorities of the users. With the user study, any library or information center can assess information priorities of the users. Information priorities shows that what user wants, what kind of information user required. Another one is evaluation of information user and information centers. With the help of user study, any information center evaluate how information is used by users. So students, let us discuss what we have learned from this module. In this module, we have learned that there is a need to develop healthy relationship between users and library and information centers. Now it becomes necessary to conduct user study by the library and information centers to know facts about the library and information center users. Because library user is important component of the library and information center. User is most important component of any library and information centers. We should try to study about the users. User study helps to improve library services and information centers for their information services and library services. In a present information society, it has been universally accepted that information is for users or information for all. Right information helps user to solve problems, decision making, policy making, and to prepare research projects. Thank you very much.